Take a look at the image in the bottom right corner of your screen. It's a still from one of Beyonce and Jay-Z's music videos in 2018 off of their album Everything Is Love. What can you tell about their voice from this picture? How do they express their style or their personality? And what evidence in this photo points you to that? As you're looking at this image, let me share with you a couple of the things students have told me in the past. First of all, the amount of jewelry they're wearing jumps out. It suggests like they feel rich or that they're expensive and they want people to know that. Something that also backs that up is the fine detail of their clothing. They're both wearing coordinating pantsuits made out of luxurious fabrics that suggest that they are dressing up to go to this museum, but also that they have the money to do so. Now, this is filmed in the Louvre, a museum in France that contains the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci's most famous painting. It's worth millions and millions of dollars. And the way that Jay-Z and Beyonce have positioned themselves draws your eye to them first. They're standing in the foreground or front of the image, and the painting's in the background. Now, this is a painting people line up for like hours to see. When I went to go to the Louvre in France, I could barely see the painting. It was so far away from me because there was just so many people between me and the painting. But here we've got Beyonce and Jay-Z lined up looking at the camera. They're not turned around looking at the Mona Lisa. They're looking at you. And you can get a little bit of their tone, their voice from their expression. The way their heads are up, not tilted. They look very proud in their posture that's very straight and in the way they face the camera head on. And they're almost suggesting in their stance, standing in front of the Mona Lisa, that they are also worthy of attention. They are also expensive. They are also incredibly valuable. That's one way they communicate their voice. Beyonce and Jay-Z like to maintain an image of exclusivity, and they do that here. Now, Beyonce is known for also bringing a huge voice to her music. When you read her lyrics, you often can tell, okay, that's her. Take a look at the lyrics from the same music video. She says, "Give me my check, put some respect on my check, or pay me in equity, watch me reverse out of debt." Skirt. Is that how you could say it? He got a bad We live in lavish, lavish. I get expensive fabrics. I got expensive habits. Now, when you're looking at that, you are not going to think, okay, Taylor Swift wrote that. Why? It's Beyonce's voice. What does she do that makes it sound like her? Let me show you what I noticed. First off, I highlighted in purple all of the stuff that makes it sound like she's rich. Because again, one defining characteristic is that Beyonce and Jay-Z are both like self-made, really high-paid musicians. She talks about checks and living lavish, expensive fabrics and habits. And so this establishes her as somebody who is fancy. She talks a lot about equity, specifically feminism, with her platform. And a lot of the media she produces supports those ideas. And I noticed that part of her standing out when she talks about putting respect on her check and paying her in equity, which has been a subject for years, the gender divide between pay. So these sort of clues start to make me think, okay, this is Beyonce. This is not Demi Lovato. This is not Ed Sheeran. This is Beyonce. Beyonce also uses like the repetition that sometimes sounds like her. She often repeats ideas, sometimes right after one another, like when she repeats "pay me in equity" twice or "lavish" twice, but also just repeats it in her choruses, or if you listen to one of her songs in completion. And then of course we got a little bit of swearing over there, got a bad B word. Again, something that points me away from other singers and maybe towards Beyonce, who uses that word sometimes almost as a positive and sometimes as a negative. Can't really tell here. I think if it's referring to Jay-Z, she's calling herself a bad B word, and therefore it's a positive. She's the sort of person who can pull off making that sound like a good thing. And so this just sounds like Beyonce, even if I hadn't told you it was. You're, again, never going to mistake this for Taylor Swift. That's the thing about voice. It shows your personality through your writing. You can't show yourself through an image, but you can show yourself through your writing when it comes to applying to college. It's super important that when you're writing for college or career applications, that you come off sounding not like a robot, but like you, so that the people who are reviewing your application can decide whether they want to work with you or admit you to their school. Writing with a clear voice, though, is not something that happens just naturally, always. It requires a lot of conscious choices, and it requires practice to be able to make sure that you can pull out a unique sounding type of writing. I'm going to go ahead and review some elements of voice with you to help you figure out ways to make your writing pop and to sound unique. The first one, and I'm sure you've heard of these before in English class, is diction. It's your strong word choice. It's choosing synonyms maybe that have different degrees of meaning that stand out more. Instead of me coming up to you and saying, I'm angry, okay, boring word, come up to you and say, she's enraged. She's furious. It's a stronger word that conveys a lot more emotion. Instead of me saying, I walked around campus when I was feeling sad, I might say, I moped around campus. It suggests a little more sadness. Just including more details is a way to make your voice pop. Because the more details you include, the better someone can picture your story or understand your topic. For example, here's a sentence that has zero detail that I straight up I've seen this in a personal statement before. My mom said that people are like flowers. And I'm like, so what? Here's the better context. If I was the writer, I would have included more details, maybe something like this. One evening, my mom said to me that people first have to wilt like flowers before they can bloom into their best selves. This would help the writer have their point come across more. They'd been talking about how people need to become better and grow, but also makes it sound more unique. It sounds more like I wrote it instead of which one of you out of 50 people wrote this. Imagery is a huge way to pump up your voice in your writing. This is sensory details, sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch, and that helps bring to life what you're writing. You can be describing melting ice cream dripping pink from the cone down your fingers, and it's a lot easier to imagine that, and it sounds more interesting to read than I ate an ice cream sandwich for breakfast. Which I did. Figurative language is when you express ideas that are not literal, and that helps your readers kind of think. For example, this metaphor, this week was a roller coaster, or he smiles bright like the sun, or for those of you who are still reading Twilight because Midnight Sun came out, he sparkled like a vampire in the sun. Figurative language. When it's not used cheesily like those examples were, it helps your voice come through. Syntax is another way to make your voice come alive. This comprises a bunch of different things. First of all, pay attention to your sentence structure. Are you starting all your sentences the same? I was feeling sad. Then I changed my classes. Then I did better in school. Pay attention to the word order. Are there ways to change up your wording to sound more interesting? And of course, punctuation. Punctuation matters a lot in coming through, helping your voice come through. Exclamation marks, playing around with dashes, or even semicolons. And we'll work a little bit more on that this year. Finally, tone is a huge way to convey your voice. This is how you express attitude in writing. You can express your tone through all of the things we've discussed: diction, detail, imagery, figurative language, and syntax. Beyonce has a very empowered tone here. She is suggesting in these lyrics that she is in charge, calling herself a bad B word, saying that she's got tons of money, lavish fabrics, and habits. She's getting checks rolling in. She wants respect. She's demanding you pay her in equity. That shows power in those strong word choices and in her repetition. Okay? That's what I want you doing, is sounding like yourself. So as you write, here are a couple questions that I always ask myself and that I would recommend you ask yourself. First, can you tell you're enthusiastic about the topic? There's so many students who care about what they're writing about, and it never shows through their writing. I had a kid who was researching the opioid crisis for his capstone last year. Super hyped about it, wanted to become a nurse, and in his writing, it straight up sounded like he was being forced to write this on pain of failure. He was like, the opioid crisis is scary, when in reality, talking to him about it, he got super animated. So you gotta say, do I sound enthusiastic, and does this writing sound like me? Also pay attention to how you want your readers to feel. What emotions do you want to invoke in them? Especially as you're trying to get them to hire you for a job or to admit you into a college. You want them to feel excited about you, or perhaps impressed or respectful of your accomplishments. And finally, is your story or your letter or your paper going to hold your readers' attention? Do they want to hear more, or are they bored out of their minds? You got to ask yourself those questions as you write. Your task is going to be to write a one-page description of an event or a moment that when you were less than perfect, in response to Perez's argument that you've got to fail and that it's okay to show that to colleges. So please explain in this one-page piece of writing what your response was to that moment, and what that says about your character, how it shows your growth. Not just, I had a problem, here was my problem, but here's how I grew from it. Here's how you can tell that I'm someone who's determined, or I'm someone who is compassionate. And do that specifically using these elements of voice we talked about: tone, diction, imagery, to make your story come alive. I'm excited to read what you write. Go forth, be awesome, and give me those responses.